final numbers for the U.S. presidential elections last week is in, cementing Donald Trump's stunning political comeback. So Trump won a total of 312 electoral college votes after Arizona was called over the weekend. The state voted blue in 2020 but flipped back to the Republicans this year. That leaves Vice President Kamala Harris with 226, which, as you can see on the map, is a far cry from the close race the mainstream pollsters had been predicting. Trump also swept all 7 battleground states, not to mention that Republicans also took back control of the Senate. They're also just 4 seats away from taking control of the House of Representatives, which, if they win, would give the Republicans unprecedented full control of the U.S. government. So what will a Donald Trump-Bongbong Marcos relationship look like? For some insights, let me bring in former PCGG Commissioner Atty. Ruben Carranza, who's now a senior associate at the International Center for Transitional Justice in New York City. Good evening from Manila, Atty. Ruben.
Good evening to all of you. It's morning here, but
good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Good evening from us. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about is the fun fact that we discovered recently, which is Trump Tower in New York City, the flagship Trump Tower, used to belong to the Marcos family. It used to be called 40 Wall Street, and I know you're intimately familiar with that. Talk us through it.
Yeah, 40 Wall Street is still called the Trump Building. It's actually very close to my office in New York. And it was built in 1929, 1930, several stories high, one of the iconic buildings in Manhattan. And it was owned by a New York real estate company for a while. But in 1982, Imelda Marcos was about to celebrate her birthday that year and made a wish to her husband. Her wish was to buy buildings in New York, and it was one of about 4 buildings that the dictator bought for his wife. Trump Tower, 40 Wall Street at that time, was purchased for $71 million by Ferdinand Marcos as a birthday gift to Imelda Marcos in 1982. And over the years, it's been transferred in terms of its ownership and lease, and the present-day lessee is Donald Trump, or the Trump Corporation, although a New York judge found that the corporation and Donald Trump himself and the family committed fraud by claiming a higher value for the building to obtain loans from various banks. And so they were stripped of control over the building and several other properties.
So 1982 is when the Marcos family bought the building. At what point did they lose control of it?
They lost control when the revolution took place, and in 1986, and the PCGG, which was newly created at that time, asked the U.S. government for assistance in enforcing various freeze orders on Marcos properties in the U.S. So this was one of the properties whose ownership and transfer was frozen. It was eventually sold at auction because the Marcoses, through they were represented by dummies actually in owning the building. One of their dummies was Glyceria Tantoco, the family that owns Rustans, actually were used as dummies by Ferdinand Marcos, and they did not pay taxes on the building. So after it was eventually sold on behalf of the Philippine government, less than, I think, about $5 million was taken back, recovered in the sale of this building.
Mr. Carranza, I was just curious. I'm sure you've heard that they've abolished the PCGG. In your opinion, having served there and going after the ill-gotten wealth of the Marcoses, how do you feel about the abolition of the PCGG? Do you think it was the right time for it to be abolished? Has it really exhausted everything that the Commission can do to try to get back the wealth?
I actually haven't heard that, and I'm hearing that for the first time. I don't know whether that's really their intention to get rid of a commission that the Marcoses have also been using to coerce former Marcos cronies and even present Marcos cronies to give back, in quotation marks, what the Marcoses claim as their own. There's an entire list of assets that the Marcoses claim they own, mainly shares of stock in various Philippine companies. The PCGG under Senator Salonga, and even when I was there, called it the IME list after IME Marcos, because she asked their accountants, including an accountant now in exile in Hong Kong named Rolando Gapud, to make a list of all the assets that the Marcoses claim were there so that they could force cronies to give it up. So I don't know whether the PCGG is in fact about to be abolished, because I think that the Marcoses have a use for it, but certainly not for the intention it was created.
Knowing that this relationship between the Marcoses and the Trumps, what was on your mind when Donald Trump emerged as a clear winner? Do you think that we could leverage on that relationship, knowing how transactional Donald Trump is? Or do you see some obstacles along the way? What would Bongbong Marcos have to do to be able to curry the favor of a Donald Trump?
Well, they will be natural allies because corruption comes to both families naturally. Donald Trump and Imelda Marcos already know each other from Imelda Marcos's various shopping trips to New York, although Donald Trump did not meet with Imelda Marcos or any of the Marcoses during their exile. So that also says something about how Donald Trump sees people. If he has use for them, he will use them. And if he has no use for them, if he doesn't gain anything, if he doesn't scam anyone else with them, then he won't. One of the things that I think are very telling about this is that even some of the Marcos cronies may also have their own way of accessing the incoming second Trump administration through other means. So in the past, they used a realtor, for example, who was the developer for the Trump building there in Manila, to be some kind of special envoy to the United States, bypassing the U.S. ambassador. So there will be others within the Marcos circle who will try to get in on the corruption that many of us here in the United States expect will increase in the 4 years ahead.
So it's still going to boil down to personal relationships, is what you're saying, in the second Trump presidency. Those personal linkages are going to be very important.
Certainly, and of course, Marcos Jr. is not the only government leader who will use personal relationships in accessing the Trump administration. Well, I saw a statement that Marcos Jr. released when the results came out. He said, there will be a better future in Philippine-American relations under Trump. But what's important is also to look at the very bitter past in that relationship, not just with the Trumps, but with the United States. When you asked about 40 Wall Street, for example, it was acquired for $71 million, when at that time, in 1982, the Philippines' debt was $24 billion already, a huge amount of money. And there was a famine going on in Negros because the sugar and cane industry had collapsed, and about, I think, 300,000 children were malnourished. And here's a family that acquires a $71 million building in the middle of all that. So this just shows how insensitive the Marcos family is, and that's exactly the kind of person Donald Trump is. So in some ways, they'll get along, but to the detriment of both Americans and Filipinos.
Well, some analysts say that President Marcos has to sell how strategic the Philippine and U.S. alliance is to Donald Trump, and probably take advantage of his strong anti-China sentiment. What do you make of that?
The problem is that Donald Trump is anti-China only when he doesn't profit from any relationship with China. The other problem, of course, is that the economic relationship between the United States and China is in many ways similar to the economic relationship between the Philippines and China. There's a huge dependence in terms of production, in terms of trade. The balance may not be always on the side of the Philippines or on the side of the United States for that matter. So all these bluffing and threats may not really work out for the United States. I mean, Trump's insistence, for example, on imposing tariffs on imports into the United States, which she's been fixated about, will lead to huge increases in prices for ordinary consumers in the United States, and that relationship will eventually, I think, matter more than the military aspects of that relationship, which in the Philippines may be the more important aspect. The United States, for example, has never recognized the Philippine claim to the South China Sea area, the West Philippine Sea that the Philippines claims, and I don't think that will change under Donald Trump. So the United States, whether it's under Trump or under any other president, will stand for its own interests and not necessarily and not really for Philippine interests.
So can I take that to mean, Mr. Carranza, that you see continuity in terms of that aspect, the TIF in the West Philippine Sea, that the Mutual Defense Treaty, all of that will, go on regardless of who's in the White House?
Well, we saw from the first Trump administration that there is a level of, in a way, randomness, but also just bluster and lack of strategy, really, in Donald Trump's brain. And that brain, again, is driven by greed and avarice and ego more than anything else. And when he claims, for instance, that he's a very good friend of Xi Jinping, he says that as a personal matter, not as a foreign policy matter. So that unpredictability will make a difference because the Philippines wants predictability in responding to this relationship, this constant confrontations, for example, in the South China Sea with China or with any other claimants, and between the unpredictability of an authoritarian leader in the United States and this desire for legitimacy by a son of an authoritarian leader in the Philippines, I don't think that these two drivers of their decision making will coincide with the respective interests of their countries.
Attorney Ruben, we've got 30 seconds left on the clock, but I just very quickly wanted to ask you about immigration. Do you think he's going to make good on his promise to crack down on immigration? That's something that's worrying some of the Phil-Am communities there.
Including our ambassador.
Did so in the he did so in the first Trump administration, a Muslim ban, which really was an immigration or a travel ban. I think that here he'll be more strategic. He will not do it right away. Maybe he will have some symbolic action. But yes, this is one of the things that he feels that he can do right away, and he will try to send a signal right away.
Okay, something to watch out for. We're going to have to leave that there for tonight. Thanks so much for your insights. Former PCGG Commissioner and now Senior Expert at the International Center for Transitional Justice, Attorney Ruben Carranza.